The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. Chapter 2. The limousine zoomed north out of Newport, turned down a gravel road, kept the rendezvous with a helicopter that was waiting in a pasture. The purpose of Malachi Constant's switch from the limousine to the helicopter was to prevent anyone from following him, and to prevent anyone from discovering the bearded and bespectacled visitor to the Rumford estate. No one knew where Constant was. Neither the chauffeur nor the pilot knew the true identity of their passenger. Constant was Mr. Jonah K. Rowley to both. "Mr. Rowley, sir?" said the chauffeur, as Constant stepped out of the limousine. "Yes," said Constant. "Wasn't you scared, sir?" said the chauffeur. "Scared?" said Constant, sincerely puzzled by the question. "Of what?" "Of what?" said the chauffeur incredulously. "Why, all them crazy people who tried to lynch us." Constant smiled and shook his head. Not once in the midst of the violence had he expected to be hurt. It hardly helps to panic, do you think?" he said. In his own words, he recognized Rumford's phrasing, even a little of Rumford's aristocratic level. "Man, you must have some kind of guardian angel. Lets you keep cool as a cucumber no matter what," said the chauffeur admiringly. This comment interested Constant, for it described well his attitude in the midst of the mob. He took the comment at first as an analogy, as a poetic description of his mood. A man who had a guardian angel would certainly have felt just as Constant had. "Yes, sir," said the chauffeur, "something sure must be looking out for you." Then it hit Constant. This was exactly the case. Until that moment of truth, Constant had looked upon his Newport adventure as one more drug-induced hallucination, as one more peyote party vivid novel, entertaining and of no consequence whatsoever. The little door had been a dreamy touch, the dry fountain another, and the huge painting of the all-white touch-me-not little girl with the all-white pony, and the chimney-like room under the spiral staircase, and the photograph of the 3 sirens on Titan, and Rumford's prophecies, and the discomfiture of Beatrice Rumford at the top of the stairs. Malachi Constant broke into a cold sweat. His knees threatened to buckle and his eyelids came unhinged. He was finally understanding that every bit of it had been real. He had been claimed in the midst of the mob, because he knew he wasn't going to die on Earth. Something was looking out for him all right, and whatever it was saving his skin. For Constant quaked as he counted on his fingers the points of interest on the itinerary Rumford had promised him. Mars, then Mercury, then Earth again, then Titan. Since the itinerary ended on Titan, presumably that was where Malachi Constant was going to die. He was going to die there. What had Rumford been so cheerful about? Constant shuffled over to the helicopter, rocked the great ramshackle bird as he climbed inside. "You Rowley?" said the pilot. "That's right," said Constant. "Unusual name you got there," said Rowley, said the pilot. "Unusual first name you got, Mr. Rowley," said the pilot. "Okay. Beg your pardon?" said Constant noiselessly. He was looking through the plastic dome of the cockpit cover, looking up into the sky. He was wondering if there could be any eyes up there, any eyes that could see everything he did. And if there were eyes up there, and if they wanted him to do certain things, go to certain places, how could they make him? Oh God! But it looked thin and cold up there. "I said, you've got an unusual first name," said the pilot. "What's that?" said Constant. He had forgotten the foolish first name he had chosen for his disguise. "Jonah," said the pilot. 59 days later, Winston Niles Rumford and his loyal dog Kazak materialized again. A lot had happened since their last visit. For one thing, Malachi Constant had sold out all of his paintings and his holdings, and... For one thing, Malachi Constant had sold out all of his holdings in the Galactic spacecraft. The corporation that had the custody of the great rocket ship called the White Whale. He had done this to destroy every connection between himself and the only known means of getting to Mars. He had put the proceeds of the sale into Moon Mist Tobacco. For another thing, Beatrice Rumford had liquidated her diversified portfolio of securities, and had put the proceeds into shares of galactic spacecraft, intending thereby to get a leather-lunged voice in whatever was done with the white whale. Another thing, Malachi Constant had taken to writing Patrice Rumford offensive letters in order to keep her away, in order to make himself absolutely and permanently intolerable to her. To see one of these letters was to see them all. The most recent one went like this: written on stationery of Magnum Opus Inc., the corporation whose sole purpose was to manage the financial affairs of Malachi Constant. Hello from Sully, California. Space baby. Gee, I am sure looking forward to jazzing a high-class dance with a dame like you under the twin moons of Mars. You're the only kind of dame I never had, and I bet your kind is the greatest. Love and kisses from a starter Mal. Another thing, Patrice had bought a capsule of cyanide, more deadly surely than Cleopatra's asp. It was Patrice's intention to swallow it if ever she had to share so much as the same time zone with Malachi Constant. For another thing, the stock market had crashed, wiping out Patrice Rumford among others. She had bought galactic spacecraft shares at prices ranging from 151.5 to 169. The stock had fallen to 6 in 10 trading sessions and now lay there, trembling fractional points, since Patrice had bought on margin as well as for cash. She had lost everything, including her Newport home. She had nothing left but her clothes, her good name, her finishing school education, and for another thing, Malachi Constant had thrown a party 2 days after returning to Hollywood, and only now, 56 days later, it was petering out. For another thing, a genuinely bearded man named Martin Coradubian had identified himself as the bearded stranger who had been invited into the Rumford estate to see the materialization. He was a repairer of solar panels in Boston and a charming liar. A magazine had bought his story for $3,000, sitting in Skip's museum under the spiral staircase. Winston Niles Rumford read Coradubian's magazine story with delight and admiration. Coradubian claimed in his story that Rumford had told him about the year 10 million AD. In the year 10 million, according to Coradubian, there would be a tremendous house cleaning. All records relating to the period between the death of Christ and the year 1 million AD would be hauled to dumps and burned. This would be done, said Coradubian, because museums and archives would be crowding the living right off the earth. The million-year period to which the buried junk related would be summed up in history books in one sentence, according to Coradubian. Following the death of Jesus Christ, there was a period of readjustment that lasted for approximately 1 million years. Winston Niles Rumford laughed and laid Coradubian's article aside. Rumford loved nothing more than a thumping good fraud. 10 million AD, he said out loud. A great year for fireworks and parades and world fairs. A merry time for cracking parades. A merry time for cracking open cornerstones and digging up time capsules. Rumford wasn't talking to himself. There was someone else in Skip's museum with him. The person was his wife, Patrice. Patrice was sitting in the facing wing chair. She came downstairs to ask her husband's help in a time of great need. Rumford blandly changed the subject. Patrice, already ghostly in white peignoir, turned the colour of lead. What an optimistic animal man is, said Rumford rosily. Imagine expecting the species to last 10 million more years. as though people were as well designed as turtles. He shrugged. Well, who knows? Maybe human beings would last that long just on the basis of pure cussedness. What's your guess? What? Said Beatrice. Guess how long the human race will be around, said Rumford. From between Beatrice's clenched teeth came a frail, keen, sustained note so high as to be almost above the range of the human ear. The sound bore the same ghastly promise as the whistle of fins on a falling bomb. Then the explosion came. Beatrice capsized her chair, attacked the skeleton, threw it crashing into a corner. She cleaned off the shelves of Skip's museum, bouncing the specimens off the walls, trampling them into the floor. Rumford was flabbergasted. Good God, he said. What made you do that? Don't you know everything? Said Beatrice hysterically. Does anybody have to tell you anything? Just read my mind. Rumford put his palms to his temples, his eyes wide. Static. All I get, he said, is static. What else would be there but static, said Beatrice. I'm going to be thrown right out into the street, out without even the price of a meal, and my husband laughs and wants me to play guessing games. It wasn't any ordinary guessing game, said Rumford. It was about how long the human race was going to last. I thought that might sort of give you more perspective about your own problems. The hell with the human race, said Beatrice. You're a member of it, you know, said Rumford. Then I'd like to put down for transfer to the chimpanzees, said Beatrice. No chimpanzee husband would stand by while his wife lost all her coconuts. No chimpanzee husband would try to make his wife into a space whore for Malachi Constant of Hollywood, California. Having said this ghastly thing, Beatrice subsided some. She wagged her head tiredly. How long is the human race going to be around, Master? I don't know, said Rumford. I thought you knew everything, said Beatrice. Just look into the future. I look at the future, said Rumford, and I find that I shall not be in the solar system when the human race dies out. So the end is much a mystery to me as it is to you. In Hollywood, California, the chimes of the blue telephone in the rhinestone phone booth by Malachi Constant's swimming pool were ringing. It is always pitiful when any human being falls into a condition hardly more respectable than that of an animal. How much more pitiful it is when the person who falls has had all the advantages. Malachi Constant lay in the wide gutter of his kidney-shaped swimming pool, sleeping the sleep of a drunkard. There was a quarter of an inch of warm water in the gutter. Constant was fully dressed in blue-green evening shorts and a dinner jacket of gold-brown. His clothes were soaked. He was all alone. The pool had once been covered uniformly by an undulating blanket of gardenias. But a persistent morning breeze had moved the blooms to one end of the pool, as though folding a blanket to the foot of a bed. In folding back the blanket, the breeze revealed a pool, bottom, paved with broken glass. Cherries, twists of lemon peel, pale till buttons, slices of orange, stuffed olives, sour onions, a television set, a hypodermic syringe, and the ruins of a white grand piano. Cigar butts and cigarette butts, some of them marijuana, and they were littered on the surface. The swimming pool looked less like a faculty for sport than a punch bowl in hell. One of Constance's arms dangled in the pool itself. From the wrist under water came the glint of his solar watch. The watch had stopped. The telephone chimes persisted. Constance mumbled but did not move. The chimes had stopped. Then, after 20 seconds, the chimes began again. Constance groaned, sat up, and groaned. From the inside of the house came a brisk, efficient sound. high heels on a tile floor. A ravishing, brassy, blonde woman crossed from the house to the phone booth, giving Constant a look of haughty contempt. She was chewing gum. "Yeah," she said to the phone. "Oh, it's you again. Yeah, he's awake. Hey, hey," she yelled at Constant. She had a voice like a grackle. "Hey, Space Cadet," she yelled. Said Constant. "The guy who's president of that company you own wants to talk to you." "Which company?" said Constant. "Which company are you president of?" said the woman into the phone. She got her answer. "Magnum Opus," she said. "Ransom K. Fern of Magnum Opus," she said. Tell him I'll call him back," said Constant. The woman told Fern, got another message to reply. Sorry. The woman told Fern, "Got another message to relay to Constant. He says he's quitting." Constant stood unsteadily, rubbing his face with his hands. "Quitting?" he said dully. "Old Ransom K. Fern? Quitting?" "Yeah," said the woman. She smiled hatefully. "He says you can't afford to pay his salary anymore. He says you better come in and talk to him before he goes home." She laughed. "He says you're broke." Back in Newport, the racket of Patrice Rumford's outburst had attracted Moncrief, the butler, to Skip's museum. "You called, ma'am?" he said. "It was more of a scream, Moncrief," said Patrice. "She doesn't want anything." "Thank you," said Rumford. "We were simply having a spirited discussion." "How dare you say whatever I want?" "Something or not," said Patrice hotly to Rumford. "I'm beginning to catch on that you're not nearly as omniscient as you pretend to be. So it happens. I want something very much. I want a number of things very much." "Mom," said the butler. "I'd like you to let the dog in, please," said Patrice. "I'd like to pet him before he goes. I would like to find out if a Cronus Enclastic Infundibula kills love in a way that it kills love in a human man." Oh, that was good and I fucked it up. Let me say it again. "I'd like to pet him before he goes. I would like to find out if a Cronus Enclastic Infundibula kills love in a dog the same way it kills love in a man." The butler bowed and left. "That was a pretty scene to play before a servant," said Rumford. "By and large," said Patrice, "my contribution to the dignity of the family has been somewhat greater than yours." Rumford hung his head. "I failed you in some way. Is that what you're saying?" "In some way," said Patrice. "In every way." "What would you have me do?" said Rumford. "You could have told me this stock market crash was coming," said Patrice. "You could have spared me on what I'm going through now." Rumford's hands worked in air, unhappily trying on various lines of an argument for size. "Well," said Patrice, "I just wish we could go out to the Chronos Enclastic and Fundibula together," said Rumford, "so you could see for once what I was talking about. And all I can say is that my failure to warn you about the stock market crash is as much a part of the natural order as Halley's Comet, and it makes an equal amount of sense to rage against it as this to the other." "You're saying you have no character and no sense of responsibility towards me," said Patrice. "I'm sorry to put it that way, but it's the truth." Rumford rocked his head back and forth. "A truth, but... oh, God, what a punctual truth," he said. Rumford retreated into his magazine again. The magazine opened naturally to the center spread, which was a color ad for a moonlit cigarette. Moon Mist Tobacco Limited. Moon Mist cigarette, whatever. It had been bought recently by Malachi Constant. "Pleasure in depth," said the headline on the ad. The picture that went with it was a picture of the three Sirens of Titan. They were the white girl, the golden girl, and the brown girl. The fingers of the golden girl were fortuitously spread as they rested on her left breast, permitting an artist to paint in a moon mist cigarette between the two of them. The smoke from her cigarette passed beneath the nostrils of the brown and white girls, and their space-annihilating concupiscence seemed centered on mentholated smoke alone. Rumford had known that Constant would try to debase the picture by using it in commerce. Constant's father had done a similar thing when he found out he could not buy Leonardo's Mona Lisa at any price. The old man had punished Mona Lisa by having her used in an advertising campaign for suppositories. It was the free enterprise way of handling beauty that threatened to get the upper hand. Rumford made a buzzing sound on his lips, which was a sound he made when he approached compassion. The compassion he approached was for Malachi Constant, who was having a far worse time than it of Beatrice. "Have I heard your whole defence?" said Beatrice, coming behind Rumford's chair. Her arms were folded, and Rumford, reading her mind, knew that she thought of her sharp, projected elbows as bullfighters' swords. "I beg your pardon," said Rumford. "This silence, this hiding in the magazine, this is the sum and total of your rebuttal," said Beatrice. "Rebuttal? A punctual word, if ever there was one," said Rumford. "I say this, and then you rebut me. Then I rebut you. Then somebody else comes in and rebuts us both." He shuddered. What a nightmare, where everybody gets in line to rebut each other. "Couldn't you, this very moment," said Beatrice, "give me the stock market tips that would enable me to get back to where I was and gain everything I lost and more? If you had one shred of concern for me, couldn't you tell me exactly how Malachi Constant of Hollywood is going to try and trick me into going to Mars, so I could outwit him?" "Look," said Rumford, "life for a punctual person is like a roller coaster." He turned to shiver his hands in her face. "All kinds of things are going to happen to you, for sure," he said. "I can see the whole roller coaster you're on, and for sure. I could give you a piece of paper that would tell you about every dip and turn, warn you about every boogeyman who was going to pop out in the tunnels, but that wouldn't help you any." "I don't see why not," said Patrice. "Because you'd still have to take the roller coaster ride," said Rumford. "I didn't design the roller coaster, and I don't own it. I don't say who rides and who doesn't. I just know what it's shaped like." "And Malachi Constant is part of the roller coaster," said Patrice. "Yes," said Rumford. "And there's no avoiding him," said Patrice. "No," said Rumford. "Well, suppose you tell me then. Just what steps bring us together," said Patrice, "and let me do what little I can." Rumford shrugged. "All right, if you wish," he said, "if it would make you feel better. At this very moment," he said, "the President of the United States is announcing a new stage in the age of space. Oh, sorry. At this very moment," he said, "the President of the United States is announcing a new age of space and to relive unemployment. Billions and billions of dollars are going to be spent in unmanned spaceships just to make work. The opening episode in this new age of space will be the firing of the whale next Tuesday. The whale will be renamed the Rumford in my honor. It will be loaded with an organ grinder. It will be loaded with organ grinder monkeys and will be fired in the general direction of Mars. You and Constant will both take part in the ceremonies, and you will go on board for a ceremonial inspection. And a faulty switch will send you on your way into the on your way with the monkeys." "You drink?" Right. "It It is worth stopping the narrative at this point to say this cock and bull story told to Patrice, is one of the few known instances of Winston Niles Rumford's having told a lie. This much of Rumford's story was true. The whale was going to be renamed and fired on Tuesday, and the President of the United States was announcing a new age of space. Some of the President's comments at the time bear repeating, and it should be remembered that the President gave the word progress as a special favor by pronouncing it prog-earth. He also flavored the words chair and warehouse, pronounced them chia and wirehouse. Now, some people are going around saying the American economy is old and sick, said the President. And I frankly can't understand how they can say such a thing, because there is now more opportunity for progress on all fronts than at any time in the human history. And there is one frontier we can make particular progress on, and that is the great frontier of space. We have been turned back on by I'm gonna stop this stupid voice. We have been turned back by space once. But it isn't the American way to take on an answer where progress is concerned. Now, people of faint heart come to see me every day at the White House, said the President. And they weep and wail and say, "Oh, Mr. President, the warehouses are all full of automobiles and airplanes and kitchen appliances and various other products." And they say, "Oh, Mr. President, there is nothing more that anybody wants the factories to make because everybody already has 2, 3, or 4 of everything." One man in particular, I remember, was a cheerful manufacturer, and he had way overproduced. And all he could think about was those cheers in the wirehouse. And I said to him, in the next 20 years, the population of the world is going to double. And all those billions of new people are going to need things to sit down on. So you just hang on to those chairs. Meanwhile, why don't you forget about those chairs in the wirehouse and think about the progress in space? I told him, and I say to you, and I say to everybody, space can absorb the productivity of 1 trillion planets the size of Earth. We could build and fire rockets forever and never fill up space and never learn all there is to know about it. Now these same people who like to weep and wail so much to say, "Oh, but Mr. President, what about the chronosynclastic infundibula? And what about this and what about that?" And I say to them, if people listen to people like you, there wouldn't ever be any progress. There wouldn't be the telephone or anything. And besides, I tell them, and I tell you, and I tell everybody, we don't have to put people on the rocket ships. We will use the lower animals only. There was no more to the speech. Malachi Constant of Hollywood, California, came out of the rhinestone phone booth, cold and sober. His eyes felt like cinders. His mouth tasted like horse blanket puree. He was positive that he had never seen the beautiful blonde woman before. He asked her one of the standard questions for times of violent change. "Where is everybody?" he said. "You threw them all out," said the woman. "I did," said Constantine. "Yeah," said the woman. "You mean you drew a blank?" Constant nodded weakly. During the 56-day party he had reached a point where he could draw almost nothing else. His aim had been to make himself unworthy of any destiny, incapable of any mission, and far too ill to travel. He had succeeded to a shocking degree. "Oh, it was quite a show," said the woman. "You were having as good a time as anybody, helping to shove a piano into the pool. Then, when it finally went in, you got this big crying jag." "Crying jag?" echoed Constant. That was something new. "Yeah," said the woman. "You said you had a very unhappy childhood,
I made everybody listen to how unhappy it was, how your father had never even threw a ball to you once, any kind of ball. Half the time nobody could understand you, but every time somebody could understand you, it was about how there never was any kind of ball. Then you talked about your mother, said the woman, and you said if she was a whore, then you were proud to be the son of a whore, if that's what a whore was. Then you said you'd give an oil well to any woman who'd come up to you and shake your hand and say real loud so everybody could hear, I'm a whore, just like your mother was. What happened then? Said Constant. You gave an oil well to every woman at the party, said the woman, and that's when you started crying. Worse than ever. And you picked me out, and you told everybody I was the only person in the whole solar system you could trust. You said everybody else was just waiting for you to fall asleep so they could put you on a rocket ship and shoot you to Mars. Then you made everybody go home but me, servants and everybody. Then we flew down to Mexico and got married, and then we came back here, she said. Now I find out you haven't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. You better go down to the office and find out what the hell is going on account of my boyfriend is a gangster, and he'll kill you. I tell him you aren't providing for me right. Hell, he said. I had an unhappier childhood than you did. My mother was a whore, my father never came home. But we were poor. Besides, at least you had billions of dollars. In Newport, Patrice Rumford turned her back to her husband. She stood on the threshold of Skip's museum, facing the corridor. Down the corridor came the sound of the butler's voice. The butler was standing in the front doorway, calling to Kazak, the hound of space. I know a little something about roller coasters, too, said Patrice. That's good, said Rumford emptily. When I was 10 years old, said Patrice, my father got it into his head that it would be fun for me to ride on a roller coaster. We were summering on Cape Cod, and we drove over to an amusement park outside of Fall River. He bought 2 tickets on the roller coaster. He was going to ride with me. I took one look at that roller coaster, said Patrice, and it looked silly and dirty and dangerous, and I simply refused to get on. My own father couldn't make me get in, said Patrice, even though he was chairman of the board of the New York Central Railroad. We turned around and came home proudly. We turned around and came home, said Patrice. Proudly, her eyes glittered. She nodded abruptly. That's the way to treat roller coasters, she said. She stalked out of the Skip's museum, went to the foyer to wait for the arrival of Kazak. In a moment, she felt the electronic presence of her husband behind her. B, he said, if I seem indifferent to your misfortunes, it's only because I know how well things are going to turn out in the end. If it seems crude of me not to hate the idea of you pairing off with Constant, it's only a humble admission on my part that he's going to make you far happier and a better husband than I ever was or will be. Look forward to being really in love for the first time, B, said Ruff. Look forward to behaving aristocratically without any outward proofs of your aristocracy. Look forward to having nothing but the dignity and intelligence and tenderness that God gave you. Look forward to taking those materials and nothing else, and making something exquisite with them. Rumford groaned tinily. He was becoming insubstantial. Oh God, he said. You talk about roller coasters. Stop and think sometime about the roller coaster I'm on. Someday on Titan, it will be revealed to you just how ruthlessly I've been used, and by whom, and to what disgustingly paltry ends. Kazak flung himself into the house. Flues flapping. He landed skidding on the polished floor. He ran in place, trying to make a right-angle turn into Patrice's direction. Faster and faster he ran, and still he could get no traction. He became translucent. He began to shrink and to fizz crazily on the foyer floor, like a ping-pong ball in a frying pan. Then he disappeared.
There was no dog anymore. Without looking behind, Patrice knew that her husband had disappeared too. "Kazak," she said faintly. She snapped her fingers, as though to attract a dog. Her fingers were too weak to make a sound. "Nice doggy," she whispered.